What's up, gang? Welcome to the Greatness Machine. I'm your host, Darius. I'm so pumped to have you here with me. Now, listen, the Greatness Machine, we're about two things. Number one, people who are living their passions. And number two, those who are creating greatness in the world and doing both of these things despite the odds against them. Each episode, we're going to feature interviews with game changers, business leaders, telling us their origin stories, what made them tick, what got them to where they are now. Why? So it can help you step into your greatness within your life, your business, and your career. Occasionally, you might hear a few solo episodes from myself, moi as I say, as I leverage my 20 years of entrepreneurship as a CEO and founder to help you grow and level up in your journey to scale your life and your business. So, come be a fly on the wall, enjoy the conversation, and I'm stoked to have you here with me. Guys, welcome to today's episode of The Greatness Machine. I'm your host, Darius, and boy, do we have some special guests. My gosh, Moby and Lindsay Hicks are in the house. What's up, guys?
Hi, I have a quick question.
Yeah.
How do you pronounce your last name? You just sort of glossed over it, and I'm really trying to make sense of it.
Oh, man, I was going to tell you that since you're going by Moby, I'm just going to go by my first name because my last name's so long. But no, it's Mir Shahzadeh. So it's actually Persian. It's of Persian descent. And go ahead. You had a question?
Mir Shahzadeh.
Mir Shahzadeh. And you want to hear a funny story about my last name since we're here?
100%.
I'm gonna throw it out. So my last name, there's three parts to it. And if you ever see someone with the Z-A-D-E-H, Zadeh at the end, they're for sure Persian. Okay, I'm half Persian. So my last name is Mir Shahzadeh, and Mir means royal, Shah means king, and Zadeh means descendant of. So my last name is descendant of the royal king. Now the funny part is that my paternal grandfather, that was not his last name. It was my paternal grandmother's maiden name, and he took it because it had such strong meaning. Because he's like, oh man, I got to associate myself with the royalty. He was a hustler, so he took his wife's last name. So there you go. Now you know the history of my last name.
Well,
I like it.
I've never heard such a complicated name, and it sounds so regal and fancy. So congratulations.
Thank you. My parents named me after Darius the Great, who ruled the world, and then I got my last name. So I'm just here to kick ass and take names and have a regal name, but I appreciate it nonetheless. Do you guys mind if I do a little bit of housekeeping and then we'll get popping on the show?
Oh, yeah. Great.
Let's do it. You guys, so listen, for listeners who are new to the show, we're about two things here at The Greatness Machine. People are living their passions and those creating greatness and doing so despite the odds. And Moby and Lindsay are neither short of passion or greatness. So before the show, I was just going to say this. Listeners, I'm going to admit to something right now. Probably 30, no, maybe a little less than that because I would have been 15. Probably about 27, 28 years ago. I will admit, I was a raver that went to house parties in downtown San Francisco, and I was in love with Moby's music all through the 90s and early 2000s, back when I was a big dance party guy. And so just the minute like his PR team shot the bio over that him and Lindsay want to be on the show, I was like, yeah, in 2 seconds, man. I'm a huge fan of the music, and any project you're working on, we're so happy to support for you here at The Greatness Machine. So thanks for coming on, guys. I'm so pumped to have you here. I'd like to do a little bit of your guys' formal bios, and then if you guys don't mind, we could get popping on the show. Does that work?
Great.
Awesome. So for listeners who are maybe not familiar with Moby and Lindsay, Moby is a singer and songwriter, producer from New York City, music legend, sold over 20 million albums, 2 songs on the Billboard 100, Southside with Gwen Stefani and A$AP Rocky. And man, you've done so much, man. I would spend like the next 15 minutes talking about all the cool things you worked on. One of the things that I said, you've made it when you've performed the closing ceremonies of the Winter Olympics in the same year that you had Eminem talk shit on you. So I was like, man, what an amazing year for someone. And so I'm so pumped to just talk about all the cool projects you're working on. Today we're going to be talking about the new project Moby Pod, which is your podcast that you guys are working on, as well as you got a movie, books. I mean, so many cool projects that you're working on in the world of Moby. On our other side here, we got Lindsay, and I'll tell you guys this: I haven't done 3 guests before on the platform. Normally, it's because we're doing it virtually. It's just one-on-one. So bear with me as I'm managing this. But Lindsay is a creator in herself. She's an accomplished creative executive and producer with extensive experience launching out-of-the-box programming and television. And you're also the head of development for Moby Entertainment. Is that correct?
For Little Walnut Productions, which is Moby's TV film production company.
Oh, very cool. So you guys, I'd love it, and you guys could decide who goes first, but I'd love to do a little bit of origin story. How did you guys get to where you got to? And then we could talk about all the cool things you're working on. Maybe, Moby, do you want to start?
Sure. Okay, so my origin story. I was born in New York in 1965, and my father died when I was 2. I'll try and keep it brief, even though we started 57 years ago. And I grew up poor white trash in Darien, Connecticut. And the reason I mention Darien, Connecticut is I assume a lot of your listeners are familiar with Darien, Connecticut, which might be the wealthiest place on the planet. And it was very strange growing up on food stamps and on welfare in arguably one of the most affluent towns in the world. So I spent a lot of time around affluence, but at the same time buying my clothes at Goodwill and Salvation Army. And I grew up playing a lot of different types of music. I studied classical music and music theory, but I also played in punk rock bands, and then I became a hip hop DJ and an electronic music DJ. And I started making my own records in the late 80s, early 90s. And just to contextualize it a little bit, I never expected to have a career as a musician. I thought I was going to get my PhD in philosophy, I was going to be a professor, and I was going to make music that no one would ever listen to. So every aspect of my career has been a complete baffling surprise. And I guess to sort of jump forward quite a bit, I had a lot of ups and downs career-wise, some successes, a lot of failures. And then in 2008, I got sober after a lifetime of drinking and doing drugs, and have sort of been figuring out what it means to be alive without recourse to alcohol and drugs, and without recourse to a lot of the trappings of fame that I had become kind of addicted to as well.
Thank you for that, man. I appreciate the story, and I can't wait to dig into some of that stuff. So I appreciate you giving us the quick and dirty, and obviously there's so much there. Lindsay, why don't you give us a little bit of your origin story as well?
Yeah, for sure. So I grew up moving all around all the time, and it was terrible, but also educational. I learned a lot about what it means to feel like an outsider and becoming an insider over and over and over again. And it gave me a real sense of the issues that repeat themselves in every group geographically that I wound up a part of in ways. And then I went to school for Shakespearean theater, for classical theater. And then I moved to New York and started working in TV and film, and realized that not only could I find a little bit more longevity, there were more opportunities there, and eventually started working in TV development for Wanda Sykes' company, and then some other companies after that, and eventually have come to have this working relationship with Moby. I feel like all along I've been looking for ways to incorporate activism into my work, which is not something everyone gets to do. And I've always been trying to find a way to do it. And in conversations with Moby, we kind of figured out that this partnership could be really meaningful to bring my skills to the table, but also my passions to the table, and have them exist together.
I love that. If you guys don't mind, so how did you guys meet? How did you guys hook up to start working on these projects? And I did forget to mention you guys are both activists, vegan and animal rights activists. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we met about, I guess, 8 years ago and have been friends ever since. And what happened was during the pandemic, Lindsay, obviously a lot of things regarding TV, film, entertainment production shut down. And Lindsay was we were hiking one day in Griffith Park, and she was sort of lamenting the fact that, a lot of her productions had been shut down, but also the work. And Lindsay, I'm going to try and be diplomatic, but saying some of the work you were working on didn't necessarily reflect your ethical activist values. And I had started a very small film, TV, entertainment production company called Little Walnut. And I simply said, well, I need someone to run my production company. We're good friends, and I trust you, and I think we're ethically aligned on this. So why don't you, quit what you're doing and come run Little Walnut, my film and TV production company?
And so that's pretty cool. And so when he asked you, were you like, hell yeah? Were you like, I don't want to do this bullshit that I'm not into. I'm going to go and do the stuff that I'm really into. Walk us through that, Lindsay.
Well, I was immediately like, obviously, but then I was like, wait, I love Moby. We're such good friends for such a long time. I was honestly like, well, working together shifts that. And we had this kind of conversation about it. And we're like, if our friendship starts to feel like something's weird, we'll figure it out then. And it just felt so right because I've been longing to address animal rights and climate change. I think it's the most important issue facing us right now is climate change. Like all of us are in real danger every single day. And I feel like getting to take on a job and get to work with my friend where we get to work towards addressing these issues every day is kind of the most amazing gift I could have been offered.
How did you guys become friends? Like you said 8 years ago. So what, is that 2015 you guys became friends?
Yeah, I think just through the world of being in Los Angeles. I mean, it's that question when you've known someone for a while, you can never really remember how and where. Like, I think we might have met at a vegan restaurant in Los Angeles and just stayed friends and became friends from there.
Nice.
I also feel like Moby is one of the most accessible, like everyone is a few degrees, like has met Moby, like Moby's very out there, especially because of the activism front. And so I have known so many people that are friends with him and, worlds collide.
Okay, got it. I want to take a step back because, I mean, like I always say in the Greatest Machine, we kind of end up where we end up. And I think a lot of it has to do with our interests and our passions, and those develop over time. And you guys are both being creators. I think that also opens up your world, right? When we go back in time and you are in the music business, came up, I did a lot of research on your background, and it was interesting to see how you came up, Moby. But to go from that and to segue into activism, was it something that you were always like, yeah, like this is something I care about? Or was it like, hey, I'm focused on business. I'm focused on the business of music, and then stumbled into that? I'd love to hear a little bit of background there.
Yeah, and I'm going to try and not ramble on too much about this because you've just hit a subject that I'm sort of obsessed with. And it's, the question of where do we find meaning? Where do we find purpose? Where do we find value? And like I said, when I was growing up, we were so poor, and the first place I lived after leaving home was an abandoned factory in a crack neighborhood. And I was making $2,000 a year. And I never thought I would have any sort of material success. And then in the 90s, especially by the late 90s, early 2000s, I started having a lot more material success than I'd imagined. And I had been raised by academics. I'd been raised by activists. And I grew up in the punk rock world. And I was raised with a lot of suspicion around fame and around materialism. But having said that, in the early 2000s, I jumped head first or feet first or both into the world of materialism and fame, like going to red carpet events, touring constantly. At one point, I had an assistant whose only job was throwing parties for me. So it was like, to my shame, but it was very educational, I found myself fully enmeshed in the world of like degeneracy, debauchery, alcohol, drugs, fame, materialism. And I thought, because to state the obvious, Darius, like we know we live in a world where people assume that the right combination of fame and wealth and external validation will fix internal issues. And I tried so hard to fix my underlying issues with fame, with money, with materialism. And the more I tried to fix myself with external things, and I don't want to sound like too much of a hippie cliche, but the more I tried to really use materialism and fame to fix psychological issues, the more depressed I became, the more anxious I became. And so then at some point, I looked at the evidence and I recognized like I was bending over backwards to create more fame, to create more wealth. And all I was ending up with was more misery. And so I thought, you know what, let me focus on what actually seems to work. And for me, that was creativity and activism, trying to like work on causes that don't benefit me. And the paradox there that I'm sure you're aware of is the more you focus on causes or issues that don't benefit you, the paradox is the more you benefit.
Yeah.
So that's my, I could ramble on for hours and hours,
No.
but that's my slightly long-winded description of how I went through the maelstrom. You know, I went through the ringer of, you know, fame and wealth and ended up talking to you guys today.
No, I love that, man. And, you know, you remind me of, you know, there's this, I don't think it's in Buddhism or called hungry. Have you guys ever heard of the concept of hungry ghost?
Lindsay was just talking about hungry ghosts literally yesterday, but like 24 hours ago, almost like to the minute, Lindsay was talking about hungry ghosts.
I swear to God, I'm going to write a book called The Hungry Ghost, because it's like what you're talking about. I think a lot of people, so for listeners who are not familiar with Lindsay, why don't you tell our listeners what the Hungry Ghost is?
Well, from my understanding, the hungry ghost is kind of the God-sized hole that we all have, and trying to that void inside and that urge to fill it, and the ease with which you think that toxic quick fixes are going to feed the hungry ghost, when usually it's spirituality and service.
Yeah. So so I had a moment probably 2-3 years ago where I was doing a plant journey with some friends, and the hungry ghost showed up.
Oh, damn.
And I had never heard of the hungry ghost before. And my friend, who's a Buddhist, who's a really good friend of mine, was like, "I'm talking to your hungry ghost right now." and the next day we talked when we were doing, you know, integration, and he explained to me what it was. And to your point, it's this demon that you know, every religion or most religions have a form of it, where it's, you know, small, like little big tummy, small mouth, and an incessant appetite, right? And so to your point, Moby, fame, you know, you're a rock star, right? Sex, drugs, rock and roll, right? All these, you know, hedonistic things. And I'm not assuming you did all those things, but I would have if I was you. And so so it's like we feed through external validation to feel better, but then we learn that nothing changes. For me, it was different. I built a couple $100 million company, and I was like, why do I fucking feel like shit? You know, why am I not happy? Why do I feel the same as I did when I had nothing? Because I hadn't fixed what was inside, you know? So for you, like finding peace, and it sounds like both of you guys have had a spiritual journey, myself included. What was it that like was that transition? And you talked a little bit earlier around, you know, substance abuse, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it sounded like that was something that you overcame. Like, what was it? What was the turning point for you where you're like, yeah, like this, I want to make this about others and not just me?
I mean, luckily, I've had a lot of sort of epiphany moments, but I will say a lot of my epiphanies, in hindsight, are really self-evident. It just takes me personally a long time to get to the point of recognizing the truth of the epiphany. You know, like for example, with alcohol and drugs, like I was drinking 20 drinks a day and spending $300 a day on cocaine. And it took me 10 years to figure out that maybe this was not a sustainable, healthy way to live. You know, waking up every day sick and hungover and suicidal and anxious and depressed. And rather than doing it once or twice, I had to do it thousands of times to get to that self-evident epiphany of like, oh, maybe I'm an addict and I probably should not keep drinking 20 drinks a day. So regarding materialism, and again, I don't want to, this is one of the reasons why I think Lindsay and I were both really excited to talk to you, is because we don't get to speak to people in the entrepreneurial space, in the business space very often. And to state the obvious, we live in a commercial world. We live in a world of materialism, wealth, entrepreneurialism, and these things are not bad. But having grown up in Connecticut, having lived in New York, having lived in LA, having had my own experience of materialism and wealth, what I will say is the creative, and sorry if this is really self-evident, but the creative aspects of entrepreneurialism are remarkable, you know, incredibly special. When people use their talents and their intelligence and their creativity to start companies and to, you know, go out and do fascinating things. But as we all know, the focus, in order to be happy, I mean, I'll even look at Warren Buffett. I don't know Warren Buffett, but he seems like a pretty happy guy because I think he loves what he does. The money is just a byproduct of it.
Totally.
I'm sure he likes the money, but like I've seen the house he lives in Omaha, and like it's pretty normal because I think he is just excited to do what he does. And that's when entrepreneurs or creatives or anybody tend to be happy, when they focus on the work and the joy of the work and the idea of trying to go out into the world and impact the world, and not just the hungry ghost aspect of like hoarding the spoils. I mean, I don't want to get in trouble by naming names, but just think of, some people, some of whom might be an ex-president, who have based their entire lives on hoarding and materialism, and they seem miserable. So just what I will say to your question is the epiphanies I've had around that have been my own misery when I've tried to be a hoarder, when I've tried to feed the hungry ghost, but also looking at other people. I was talking about this with Lindsay yesterday, that I went to this party about 15 years ago in New York. And do you know a real estate developer in New York called LaFrac?
No, I'm not familiar with that.
So he's one of the like a Trump, like a whomever, like a billionaire real estate developer. And he had a 60th birthday party, and I went to it. And Trump was there. This is when he was just a failed reality TV show host. And Bloomberg was there.
The good old days.
The good old days. And what's his name? Steve Schwartzman was there. Like all the billionaires were there. They had Earth, Wind, and Fire performing. And it was the least joyful event I'd ever been to. Like I was looking around at Bloomberg and Trump and all these billionaires, and I was like, they seem like the least happy people on the planet. And I just thought to myself, like, why am I buying into this? Why am I buying into this trajectory of desperately trying to accumulate wealth and external validation when clearly it doesn't actually create any happiness for these people?
Yeah, it's amazing. Like I've since I've grown up in, you grew up in the business of music and have segued into these other areas. I grew up in the business of business and having, I've seen people make a lot of money, and I've seen them, there's a saying that I learned, which is money makes you a lot more of what you already are. And so to see people, get their money and to see them go off the deep end or just do really fucked up stuff. And I'm like, yeah, like just made it more of what they were, accentuated it. Right. And there's a great book. It's the Almanac of Naval Ravikant. I highly recommend it. And he talks about, what happiness is to him. And he's like, happiness to me is peace, is having peace in my life and not yearning for more. And you start thinking like, wow, like that's interesting. Like it's not this like, again, not to be cliche, this sex, drugs, and rock and roll happy. Like that can be fun and happy are not the same, But I think that the world, and I'd love to hear both of your guys' thoughts on this. I think that we're talking about Warren Buffett, his partner Charlie Munger has a saying, which is, you show me people's incentives, I'll show you their behavior. And so we live in a click world of likes and followers and influence, and I'm popular, and it's like a high school popularity fucking contest, right? And it's kind of disgusting, right? Because there's more and more of it, and it's not on this platform, it's a new platform, and who gets attention and how do they get attention, and who's new business and who's the new billionaire and who's the new top 10 single on the charts. So we're these as humans, we're these like compare against ourselves against other machines. And there's that one side of it. And then when you look on if we go back to like the ancients, the Stoics, they're like, how do I live a good life? It's like, be disciplined, want less shit, right? So I'd love to having come from the world of entertainment and having, hit some pinnacles of success in the world of music, you yourself, Lindsay, coming from the entertainment industry, I'd love to hear like your guys' experience with some of the stuff I'm talking about and how you think that at least if you were to give advice to your younger self, how you might have maybe cut yourself off at the past and got here sooner. What do you think about that? And why don't you go first, Lindsay?
Yeah, I mean, I'm in a bit of a different position. I'm still in my yearning phase, and I have to be, and I want to be. I'm not at the point where I can be like, enough, we're good. Like, striving for me is a bit of my survival path. It's what I have to do because I'm still in a space where I have so many stories to tell and things to create. As far as working in TV, film, the people that actually get extreme levels of success where they're set for life is like the top 2% of people that work in TV and film. for most people, you have to work your ass off just to sell one thing in a year or two or three. That's most people's story in TV and film. So I think there is an element of striving and working and trying to strategize. And social media has changed the landscape entirely. I think the reasons that certain things get made and when they get made and who they get made with have everything to do with people that have learned how to game the algorithm. It's all strategy to try to figure out how to work with an evolving culture and what people are interested in seeing. I mean, it's happening right now. We're all watching it.
Yeah, totally. What about you, Moby? Like, what are your thoughts, like, having come from this, like, especially anyone that wants to really learn, like, your background, like, coming up in the music industry, I thought was super fascinating. It was a grind, and then you popped, you went huge, became a worldwide sensation, and then all the trappings that came along with that. But at heart, you're a creator, right? And you obviously went through a lot to get to this place of settlement. Like what advice would you have given yourself in that come up time when you were like struggling, so that you didn't have to go through maybe some of the stuff that was less pleasant?
Well, it's such a wonderful question. And actually, Lindsay and I were just talking about this yesterday, is one of the things I'm so grateful for at this point in my life is the perspective that I have, and I'm not saying I have an objective perspective. Obviously, it's very subjective. It's informed
Sure.
by experience. But because I value my perspective, I can't have really any negative opinions about even the bad stuff that led me to have this perspective. So if I was to, almost feel like it's like a parent. Granted, I'm not a parent, but like for a parent, like on one hand, you'd want to protect your children. Like if I was able to go back and talk to myself at age 20 or even age 30, there'd be a part of me that would want to say like, oh, don't do this and don't do that and do more of this. But I feel like I would have to keep my mouth shut because people have to make their own mistakes. They have to go through their own trajectory, their own journey. Like I truly believe you can't be told to not touch the flame. You have to touch the flame, in my case, multiple times to recognize that it's a bad thing to put your hand on an open flame, figuratively speaking. So I don't know the advice I would give to myself. I don't think I'd have advice, which almost makes me wonder, like, what if, and this is just an interesting idea, what if we all at some point in the future figured out time travel, and there was that first question of like, oh, I want to go back and protect myself from making those mistakes, but what if somehow we all figured out you can't? And you not only can't but you shouldn't, because the mistakes are what we learn from. The adversity is what gives us wisdom. And sometimes it hurts so much and it's excruciating when it's happening. And some adversity is obviously non-beneficial. But when I look back at the adversity I've experienced, I'm so grateful for it because it taught me. It taught me about myself. It taught me about this culture in which we live. As we keep addressing, like you talked about making hundreds of millions of dollars from the world of business, you have to do it to put it in perspective and to recognize why affluence and success, they're not bad things, but they don't fix anything. If they did, Elon would be the happiest person on the planet, and I guarantee you he isn't.
No, I met him, man. I told people he had serial killer eyes, like, like straight up dead eyes.
Yeah, he was an old friend of mine. We sort of had a falling out, but if he was a very happy person, he would not be angry tweeting 50 times a day. Like happy people don't hover over their phones posting to social media 50 or 60 times a day. So to that point, it's like we learn from our own lessons, but ideally we also, best case scenario, learn from other people's both successes and failures. That question of like, who is living a good self-actualized life of integrity, and how can I learn from their choices? And on the other end, who is making the mistakes that ideally I can hopefully avoid making myself, and how do I learn from their shortcomings?
Yeah, it's so funny you're saying that. Like, you made me think of a couple things. Like, number one, I think a lot of the times people, if the great question, right, around the time machine, if I was to go back in the time machine, probably I would stop myself from making these errors if I could, right? the reason I would want to stop making those errors is that I don't want to have these ego issues that come with these failures, right? My ego gets punched in the face when I lose a business or make a bad decision or look bad in front of people. This is the ego just getting slapped around. And there's a great book called The Power of One More, which is by a guy named Ed Milet. And he's he's in LA actually. And he has this saying in the book where he says, is life happening to you or is life happening for you? Right. And if we come at this from a perspective of life happens for you to create in that moment of adversity, let's say you had to do all those things to become who you're meant to be so that you could become who you are now to create what you're going to create, then going back in time, you're going to completely change that trajectory, you know? And I think that stems from not wanting to upset the ego, right? That's at least my perspective. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, the ego, obviously, and ego is a funny thing. I sort of see ego as being like unavoidable human fire. And what I mean by that is I don't think it's possible to be a human being without an ego. I mean, I don't want to get in trouble for saying this, but I had a long conversation with the Dalai Lama, and he was great, and he was wise, and he was insightful, but he also has an ego. I don't know if he would admit to that, but I could tell, like, he really liked listening to himself talk. Like, he wasn't really interested in, and I'm not criticizing him because he's the Dalai Lama. I'm just saying, like, I was like, oh, he had ego. I'm sure you as well, and Lindsay, like, we've met heads of states, we've met heads of corporations, we've met academics and philosophers. I have yet to meet a human being who does not have some semblance of ego. And that's where I compare it to fire, is like, fire is there and you can use it to be warm in the winter and cook your food. Ideally, it doesn't kill you or burn your house down. You know, so it's being very aware of ego, aware that you can't transcend it. What you can do is manage it in a healthy way and avoid the things that cause it to be exacerbated or to flare up. Because I know for myself, like, my ego is there waiting to, it's like a caged monster. And if I let it out of its cage, bad things happen. So I sort of have to, you know, treat it gently, keep it in its cage, and hope for the best.
Yeah. What about you, Lindsay?
I think that, weirdly, ego has kept me from failing more. And what I mean by that is I wish that I would have been less afraid to fail. Bagel, not right now.
Damn you, dog. We're on a podcast.
Bagel, we're talking. No, she's talking directly to God, so I can't blame her.
Yeah, good for her.
I wish I would have failed more. I wish that my ego would have let me put myself out there and, like, you know, if you know you have to fail 99 times to get to the 100th time, start failing immediately to get to that one win. Like, I just wish that ego I could have brushed out to just throw stuff at the wall and fail. I think maybe it's a product of growing up a woman in a world, or it's just, you know, my circumstances as a human being. But I've had real issues around perfectionism and having to work extra hard and letting things go that maybe I should have held on to, ideas, because of ego preventing me from the much needed failure.
Love that. So you guys are both creators, and, you know, you were talking earlier, Lindsay, about striving, right? You're the striving part of your life. And I've actually recently had this epiphany that I actually, because I'm a striver, I'm a creator, I'm a creative. My paintbrush is business to a certain degree, but I know, like, when I'm not creating, if I'm not being creative, like, I don't feel alive. Mm-hmm. And so I had this moment where I realized, at least for me, that there's nothing. I used to think striving for the outcome was was the win. And I've reached a point now where striving to show up to be my best self in the ways that are my gifts to the world, or where I'm like, yes, like this feels good. This feels like it's in service of something bigger. And so as creatives, you know, I'd love to hear your thoughts about, you know, when you create, striving in that creation, are you striving to make that its best so that it is a gift you can give to the world, whether it's podcasts, whether it's music, whether it's television, whether it's production, or is it like, how do you guys approach that? Because for me, it's being my best self and showing up to strive to be my best self. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on this.
Well, it's a wonderful question, because we live in a world where oftentimes the process is solely judged by the outcome. You know, the
Right.
criteria by which companies, individuals, etc., judge whatever they're working on is what do they end up with? You know, is it what are the revenue streams? What is it? Can it be monetized? You know, what's the chart position? What's the number of likes? And what I've personally had to learn is if you make something and put it out into the world and it's well received, or even if it generates revenue and does well, that's fine. But that's not the sole criteria by which creativity should be judged. Like what I've come to learn, especially in the world of music, is 99% of the joy I get from music is making it. You know, being in my studio, working on music, thinking about music, like just to me, it's such a refuge. And if I put it out into the world and people like it, that's great. But that's the 1% at the end of the process. And I would say, even like with the podcast we have, or like with your podcast right now, if our conversation goes out and people love it and it goes viral, that's fine. But the conversation itself is wonderful, you know. And
Yeah.
if nothing comes of it, like if at the end of our conversation you say, "Oops, I forgot to hit record," I'd be like, well, a little bit of a bummer, but still, we had a wonderful conversation. Why solely judge the creative process based on what the creative product is?
Yeah. I love that. What do you think, Lindsay?
I've learned a lot from Moby in this sense because Moby is not afraid to put an idea out there. He will just throw a bunch of things at the wall and doesn't give a shit if they stick. But because he's this kind of constant outpouring of creativity, there's going to be something that sticks because there's just so much. And I feel like that's been a huge lesson to me, to put creative output way in front of some perceived judgment or monetization, or what does it make, or what do people think, to not care about any of that stuff, to just make, because making is awesome and feels good, and expression is beautiful, and a divine thing that we get to do as human beings.
Yeah, this is like you're in the light of God when you create, right? Mm-hmm. So, you know, whatever God means to you. So I'd like to kind of like touch on that a little bit, because having been someone that had massive commercial success, right? Like when you go into your catalog, Moby, it's fucking awesome and ridiculous, right? It's like you have created some of the most iconic music that's ever been made, and there's probably been a lot of stuff that no one gave a shit about too. So looking at those two things, what do you think, like seeing that like juxtaposition around like, wow, this is commercially successful versus this is like, I love this, but no one else gives a shit about this. Like, what do you think it is that creates those two things?
I don't know. I mean, there's, you know, because for years, people have been trying to create algorithms to either create or evaluate pop music. And it's impossible. You know, I mean, there's certain components, like songs with words and choruses tend to do better than instrumentals. Songs with compelling rhythm tracks tend to do better than songs without drums. But like, no one knows. Or the people who do are I guess the Max Martins of the world. You know, he's the guy who produced Backstreet Boys and NSYNC and Britney, etc.
That's where I was going. Yeah.
I don't know. And I will say, like, 16 or 17 years ago, I desperately wanted to know. Like, I really wanted to figure out how to create more success, more material success, more pop success. And it used to really frustrate me that I wasn't better at it. You know, that the commercial success I've had has, and I'm saying this very earnestly, all been completely accidental. You know, like the most, like one song in particular, which I think is really funny, is the song Extreme Ways. So that was the main single from my album 18, which was the follow-up to Play, which Play sold 12 million copies. So 18 was basically like the labels were waiting for it. The media was waiting for it. I was on the cover of every magazine. And we made a video for this song, Extreme Ways. We spent almost $1 million on it. and it failed. Like it
Wow.
really failed. This was back in the days of MTV. It got played once. Literally, it got played one time at 2:00 in the morning and then got shelved. And
Oh.
so my big single to the big follow-up, like all of a sudden it was failing. And I was like, oh no, but I tried so hard. Like I really thought this was going to be a pop breakthrough, and it was a radio didn't play it, no one liked it, and it failed. But then Doug Liman made the first Jason Bourne movie, and he asked me if he could use, he and Frank Marshall said, can we use this song at the end of the Jason Bourne movie? And I was like, yeah, I mean, Jason Bourne, who's going to go see that? Sure, why not? Because
Yeah. Never seen
this
it.
book that's like 50 years old that probably no
Right.
one paid attention to then, and it became a weird hit. And now it's it's probably globally well over 1 billion streams, largely thanks to it being used in this those Jason Bourne movies. So the point being, any success I've had has just been a weird accident. Even the song Porcelain, which is my most ever streamed song, I almost didn't include it on the album Play because I thought it was too badly produced and too weird. And I was like, well, it doesn't even have a chorus, but somehow it connected. So you can't figure it. I mean, some people can, but I am definitely not one of those people. And it's just forced me to be much more, I don't know, like lighthearted and relaxed about the creative process. Like you put something out into the world, maybe it connects, maybe it doesn't, but why not at the very least and at the very most love the act of making it, so that way if it never reaches an audience, at least you have felt this like profound joy of creation.
So, you just reminded me that there's a book by Stephen Pressfield, The War of Art. I don't know if you've read that book.
Mm-hmm.
It talks about resistance, right? So when you think of like that moment where you put this like, the next album out, this is the follow-up to the massive hit, and then you fail. Was there a resistance that you had where you're like, did that hurt the creative process for you? Or were you like, fuck it, I'm just going to move on to the next thing?
It definitely, it hurt because at the time I was so head over heels in love with fame. And I put out this album and it was getting bad reviews. It was selling a lot less. I wasn't being invited to as many fancy events. So like objectively, I was aware that my star was waning. And I loved my star at the time. Like I wanted more, but in hindsight now, this is the weird thing. I'm so grateful for everything that happened or didn't happen. I'm grateful even for the flawed assumptions I made. I'm grateful for the shortcomings that led me to want external validation, because there's something about learning hard lessons painfully that removes, as far as like the role of ego, it removes any arrogance, because basically I don't have a leg to stand on when it comes to judging other people, because almost every mistake anyone else has made, I've probably made the exact same mistake, but honestly believing that it was not a mistake when I was doing it, and having to learn the hard lesson that my best thinking tends to be pretty flawed.
Yeah. There's I'm listening to this book. You guys listen to Ryan Holiday? You guys like his stuff? Have you ever heard of it? He does the Stoics. It's really good.
I mean, I know that the Stoics, which is sort of wonderful and ironic and funny, like they're having their rock star moment, which, for a Greek philosophical movement that is approximately 4,500 years old, I do think it's really funny that like suddenly the Stoics are having their moment in the sun, which is great.
I know.
So, I don't know his books.
So he takes the Stoics and he makes it digestible for people that don't want to pick up meditations and read it in its like original form.
Is that Aurelius?
Yeah, Marcus Aurelius's book. So or if you want Epictetus or any of those guys, right? And so, but he makes it super digestible. He used to be a marketing guy for American Apparel, and he's got a great podcast. So I'm reading his book, Stillness is Key, and he's talking about Tiger Woods and Tiger Woods' dad, and you said something a second ago that just reminded me of that. And they had a secret word because his dad pushed him so hard because he wanted him to be the best ever, and he could tap out when his dad was like overcoming him with too much like aggressiveness or like pushing him too hard, and they called it the E word, and the E was for enough. And so, we're kind of landing on this spot where it's like, when you have enough, then you can have that gratitude around the experience, to your point, or for striving for what's next in Lindsay's case, right? When we have enough of, then we can do those things. So, having, I want to move on to the stuff you're working on now, but I just wanted to kind of like put a pin in this. When you think of, the world of music right now, or the world of entertainment, and you think of the zeitgeist that we're in as far as like people's behavior and how they're approaching, I feel like everyone wants to be famous more now than ever because the accessibility of having your own platform is there. How do you think of enough when it comes to your work or your creative abilities? I'd love to hear it from both of you guys on this.
Moby?
Lindsay, do you want to start?
I guess it's an interesting concept. I feel like enough is such a, to me, I don't know what that is yet. I'm still on the path of figuring out what enough and not enough is. I think it's this constantly moving goalpost in all of our lives of when is enough and when isn't enough. I think like there's a certain amount of like treatment in jobs I've had before or in relationships or something when it's like, when enough is enough. But as far as pushing yourself and meeting your own goals, I'm not sure. I don't know.
I like that. I mean, and I think it's kind of a cool exercise to see when enough is enough, right?
Yeah.
And you'll probably know when you know, right? What about you, Moby?
Well, again, going back, and one of the things I'm sort of obsessed with is the idea of being willing to look at evidence. Lindsay and I were just talking about this yesterday with a friend of ours, how our culture hates evidence. Like we love ideas and beliefs, but we don't like evidence. Meaning, like for years, I thought I was a healthy person, even though I was having 20 drinks a night and spending tons of money on cocaine and drugs. And I was unwilling to look at the evidence. Because I had this idea, like, oh, I'm a healthy person. Like, yeah, you want to kill yourself every day and you're miserable and depressed and anxious and you're a drug addict and alcoholic. But still, I held on to the idea desperately that none of that was true because I didn't want to look at the evidence. And I would even say in the world of business, in the world of pop culture, is that, again, that unwillingness that people have to look at the evidence. The evidence, are they happy? If you're in a relationship or a business environment or starting a company or what have you, like, why constantly strive for more? Like I've at times in my life had too much stuff, and I've always sort of wondered, like, why? Like, I'm just one person. Like, why do I need 12 bedrooms? Like, what's the point? Like, and I think the funny thing about the concept of enough is, I would almost say it's like a universal idea that something in humans we've separated ourselves from it. Like goldfish don't understand enough. Like, they'll eat until they die. And I feel like they're maybe our closest living relative, because most animals, when they have enough, they stop eating.
Yeah.
It's so funny. I look at the animal world, I'm like, they don't own anything. Well, granted, Bagel the dog does have some toys that she really loves.
She's very attached to a couple of them.
But for the most part, like, animals are like, yeah, like, they have enough. Like, a bird has one nest. It's enough.
Yeah.
A coyote has his pack, and it's enough. And it's kind of like they understand that so intrinsically. And then you look at, like, some captains of industry, and like, they have the G4 and they have the G7 and they have the Dreamliner and they have homes all around the world, and they're miserable. And the question is,
who wants to manage that, right?
Yeah, like, why? Like you mentioned Jim Carrey, I think, earlier. Did you mention Jim Carrey?
No, it's funny. Like he just
Oh.
did. He just said something about this too. I was thinking that because he said that he's finally hit a point where he's had enough. He's done.
Psychic.
He's retired.
And
He's retiring. Wow, that was crazy. I was thinking that.
Wow. So okay, so I'm having a psychic moment from LA to Austin, but it's something that I keep coming back to. If an individual cannot be happy eating a delicious piece, like let's say in my case, like an orange, like I love a good organic orange. Like if I can't be happy sitting outside, eating an organic orange, smelling the flowers and enjoying a beautiful day, nothing's going to make you happy. And I say that because I've tried to make myself happy with everything else. It doesn't work. And when it's the idea of evidence, when we look at the evidence, it's clear it's not working for anyone. You know, just look at the billionaires, look at the heads of state, look at these incredibly materially successful people. They've never learned how to say enough, and there's no joy, you know, and there's no actual meaning and purpose. It's just that hungry ghost again. And so it's a wonderful thing if you can get to that point of looking with some degree of quasi-objective empiricism or quasi-empirical objectivism to actually say, is this enough? You know, do I, in this moment, am I fed? Am I rested? Am I alert and alive? Then probably this is enough.
I love that. So I want to respect your guys' time. Love to talk a little bit about the new show, Moby Pod, and some of the other projects you're working on. So yeah, tell us about that. Like, tell us about the Moby Pod. I mean, obviously you got a lot to say about a lot of stuff, and that, you know, honestly, I wanted to kind of go in a lot of different directions with you guys because I felt like this would be a greatest representation of how you're going to show up on your show, and we're here to promote the new podcast. So yeah, tell us a little bit about that.
Well, you know, it's funny because obvious, and I'm really stating the obvious, there are a lot of podcasts out there.
Oh yeah.
You know, there might even be as many podcasts as there are humans on the planet at this point. Like there's so many podcasts. It's such a wildly overpopulated space. So Lindsay and I were talking about starting a podcast, but we were both kind of hesitant, like, oh, does the world need another podcast? There's so many. But we thought this is such a wonderful platform to talk to each other, to talk to different guests. And the one thing we've tried to build into Moby Pod is the idea that we can address anything. You know, so for example, we just had Steve-O on to talk about sobriety and animal sanctuaries. We had our friend Dan Buettner was on. He invented the concept of the blue zones. Our friend Derek was on. He's the singer from the punk rock metal band Sepultura. So this diversity of guests, and to try and talk about everything from quantum mechanics to sobriety to art to culture. And what I will say is, and again, Lindsay and I were just talking about this yesterday, is, and I'm sorry if this sounds very esoteric, but I think it's true, is I think there is something profound and potentially even sacred with the podcasting space. Like even like this conversation we're having right now, like it's a meaningful conversation. Like we're all being respectful of each other and we're talking about important ideas in the hope that people who are listening, this might resonate with them. This might connect with them. This might be of service to them. So I've actually come to be like quite a sort of evangelist for the podcasting space. Obviously not all podcasts, but the podcasts where people are willing to be honest and have integrity and be vulnerable. I think there's something really special about that.
I love that. Lindsay, would you like to add anything? Your thoughts on the new Moby Pod?
Yeah, I just feel like it's such a gift to go deep with people, but also for my friendship with Moby, it's fun to be able to, after knowing each other for so long, get to know each other in deeper, different ways that we may not have ever gotten to if we went to lunch or on a hike, because we get to have these very focused, in-depth conversations. And I get to learn more about Moby and his career and how he ticks. And I get to learn about myself in the process and how it affects me. So it's very personal, you know, because not only is it us getting to know each other better as friends, as activists, as creators, but also getting to expand our knowledge of people that have already meant a lot to us. So it's
Yeah.
just, it's this beautiful thing that we get to do together.
Love that.
One thing I will add to that is, Lindsay, when you were talking, you reminded me of the first time I did Bill Maher's show when he had Politically Incorrect.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
This was years ago. I mean, my goodness, this was a long time ago. And Bill and I are old friendly acquaintances, and I kind of, we all have some issues, but like he's definitely like a smart, interesting personality. But I did Politically Incorrect, and I swore I would never do it again because it was all people talking on top of each other. And I liked the show. I liked watching it, but I'm not good at talking over people. I'm not good at competing with people. So I love, like Lindsay, when you were speaking, and Darius, when you're speaking, I love that we listen. And it's something magical about the podcast space is it's not people fighting for attention. It's when one person speaks, the other people are willing to listen. And I think there's something very respectful and profound about that.
Who do you guys think is the, I have two questions for you, and I want to get you out of here on time. So first question is, who do you think the ideal audience is for Moby Pod? And like, why do you think that they're the ideal audience?
Boy, oh boy, Lindsay, what do you think?
Well, I think that it's a podcast for people that care about compassion and creativity, because I believe that we are trying to create a space that is fun and deep and spiritual, and that pushes us to learn things about how we can show up better in our world and on this planet as humans. So anyone that wants to do any of those things, I would say they should listen to our podcast.
Love it.
And
Moby,
also,
what about you?
I would just add one thing is like people who are curious and open-minded, because I love the idea of talking to people. Like I said, Steve-O, most people would think of Steve-O as being a jackass because he was on the show Jackass. And he's, they would think of him as being this loud, chaotic force of anarchy. And I really appreciate that people are open-minded to listen to him and recognize, oh, he's actually quite thoughtful and quite, ethical in his own way. Like, pursuing sobriety, pursuing spirituality, wanting to open an animal sanctuary. So I would say that our audience is all the things Lindsay said, but also hopefully curious and open-minded and not immediately deferring to prejudged opinions. I think that our culture, and I apologize, I'm saying the obvious, our culture is so knee-jerk judgmental. And I just feel like for the quality of life and maybe even for the continued life of humans, we have to be willing to be more open-minded, be more open to other people's ideas, be more willing to listen to people we might ostensibly disagree with, because this cable news anger culture of just like people just like hold on to their judgments and there's no listening involved, and it's so toxic and destructive.
Yeah. My gosh, man, we should have booked like 3 hours. We could, I literally could, like, no joke. I could go. There's so many more questions I have for you guys, but I do want to respect your time. So we have the greatness question here. I forgot to tell you about that in pre-show, so I'm going to surprise you with the greatness question. So I'll ask you guys the greatness question. You guys can each give us your answer, and then we'll get wrapped up here and get you on your way. So the greatness question we ask everybody, it's all about the greatness machine is all about creating greatness in the world. So my question for both of you is, what is the number one barrier to creating greatness that you've overcome in your life? And how did you overcome it?
Wow, what a wonderful question.
Thank you.
So, Lindsay, do you want to go first, or do you want me to ramble on so you can have a moment to think about it?
I would love for you to express yourself in this moment as you like. I would never call it rambling on, which you call it all the time, but I think it's always meaningful things you say. Okay.
So Darius, can you just sort of rephrase that again? Because I want to make sure that it's a really good question. I want to respect it.
So what's the number one barrier to creating greatness that you have overcome in your life, and how did you overcome it?
The number one barrier, I would say the number one barrier that I've had has been believing my assumptions about things and an unwillingness to both accept that my assumptions are sometimes the product of limited, flawed, fear-driven information. But also, I think one of the keys to whatever little gleaning bits of wisdom I've had is the recognition that I'm not omniscient. And like in a universe that's 15, 30 billion years old with 1 trillion galaxies. I don't know anything. And that lack of omniscience is such a hard thing to accept. It's a hard thing to inhabit. But the opposite is short-sighted. At least for me, the opposite is presumptuous, fear-driven, linear, non-quantum short-sightedness. So it's the willingness. I don't know if I can transcend my linear short-sightedness, but I can be aware of it, and I can also have an understanding of the narratives and limitations it creates. And so getting to actual greatness as a human, as an activist, as a former philosophy major, as just a living being, is the openness that comes with living in a world that we will never understand, but can be eternally fascinated by.
I love that, man. Lindsay, bring us home.
I would say when I believe in my own value, the value of what I have to offer, is when I get the closest to feeling like I'm doing something great. Because it's very easy for me, and I know I'm not alone, to fall into, what's the point? No one will ever see it. It'll go poorly. But if I can get myself into a space where I feel expansive and confident and like what I'm doing has meaning, that's when I get in the pocket of what I believe to be greatness.
I love it. Man, you guys are amazing. This was so much fun. I mean, like I said, next time we'll book like 3 hours and have more fun, or go do it in LA. Moby.com is where we can find all things Moby. Anything else for people that want to connect? I know you got the podcast, you got books, you got so much movies, all these things. To give our audience the quick rundown and
do you know
get
what's
us wrapped
funny? You
up
mentioned Moby.com, and I just realized I haven't looked at that in a couple of years, so I should probably update it.
Moby Pod's on there, just so you know.
Oh, okay. Wow.
Yeah.
Maybe someone's updating it and I'm not even aware of it. So
yeah.
But I mean, Lindsay and I are both on Instagram. I'm on Instagram as Moby. Lindsay, are you on as Lindsay Hicks or Linds Hicks?
Linds Hicks.
With a Z.
Yeah.
And but now you've reminded me I need to actually look at Moby.com and remember the good old days when websites were king.
Nice. We guys, check them out on Insta. Check out the website as long as it's updated. And you guys, Moby, Lindsay, you guys are rock stars, like literally rock stars. And I appreciate you guys so much. Thank you for coming on the Greatness Machine.
Oh,
thanks,
thank
Darius.
you for having us. This was really special. Thank you.
You guys, listeners, share this. We're givers, leaders. We share good information when we get it. Moby and Lindsay dropped massive knowledge here today. Until next time, peace out. We love you.
She's my lover. You are listening to The Greatness Machine, and that's a wrap for today. Listen, if you love what you heard, subscribe to the show on whatever podcast platform that you're tuning in on so that you don't miss any of our future episodes. We have tons of great people coming on, and we're stoked to have you here to enjoy it with us. Leave us a review. Tell us what you love most about this particular episode. We love getting the reviews. We love to see what you guys love most. And if this particular episode, made you think of someone who's leveling up in their business and in their life, print screen, share it with them. Leaders are the best givers. And after all, we're all here to support and grow with each other. And in case you want to see some of the fun behind the scenes shots or some of the things that we're doing, I'm actually writing about this in my weekly newsletter. Go to www.therealdarius.com and subscribe to my newsletter. We're talking about fun things like business and life and mindfulness and cryptocurrencies and gosh, I don't even know, everything and anything, but it's tons of fun stuff I write about. I try to get it out on a weekly basis. You can subscribe at www.therealdarius.com. And with that said, look, thank you guys so much. I appreciate you. I love you. Peace. We're out of here. See you guys on the next one.